Story 1. My mother was an emergency room nurse and is now retired. 20 years ago, a man walked into the emergency room carrying an elderly woman wrapped in a plastic bag and left. She had end-stage Alzheimer's disease. She was gaunt and covered in feces. Her pajamas looked like they had not been changed in weeks. She was not wearing a diaper but should have been. She had bed sores infested with maggots that reached down to the bone, and she had no teeth. Her body was curled in a fetal position. She was very far into sepsis from both her bed sores and an untreated urinary tract infection. The smell was overwhelming, a mix of feces and decay. She could not speak. She only moaned and cried during the examination. The staff bathed her and gave her pain medication to keep her comfortable. My mother sat with her as much as she could until she died a few hours later. No one knew her name or anything about her. It is so sad. My mother still tears up every time she recounts this story because it is one of the cruelest things she witnessed. The woman herself was not disgusting. The man who abandoned her to die among strangers was. Judging by her condition, she had been neglected for years. I do not know whether the man who left her there was ever caught or prosecuted. I hope he was. Story 2. I worked with a woman years ago who smelled strongly of sewage. I had to run to the bathroom on 2 occasions because her body odor made me feel sick. Story 3. When my mother's new husband, my father, was caught molesting my sister, the county placed her in foster care. The judge said that if my mother wanted to get her back, my father had to move out. My mother refused, and my sister grew up in foster care from age 9 until 18. My mother told everyone she had kicked my sister out because my sister was using drugs. Story 4. My Nana had hepatitis C. At the time, the treatment was injections. She kept all her sharps in a Pepsi bottle under the sink. One of my uncles broke in and stole the bottle of needles to use or sell. Story 5. When I worked at the Walmart in a small Missouri town where there were no other jobs, an older woman and her middle-aged daughter came in looking at electronics and eventually needed help. The daughter was on a mobility scooter, but her mother was walking on her own feet. The daughter smelled off, like she probably had not showered in a while and lived in a house with poor cleaning standards. I figured that if she was in a scooter, she probably had difficulty getting around and taking care of things, so I let it go. Then the mother sauntered up. I am not exaggerating. This woman likely had not showered in years. The stench was beyond description. Her hair was stringy and greasy, and her skin had an unpleasant sheen. I have seen people experiencing homelessness with severe mental illness who had better hygiene. Could only speak for a minute and a half before I turned to my boss and said, "Hey, they are looking for something. Do you know anything about it?" He had been staring the whole time inside but came over, and I ran to the back room to take a breather. He understood. The strangest thing was that in every other respect she appeared completely normal. She did not act strangely. She had her purse, her car keys, and was able to buy what she wanted. She wanted a television for her trailer and an Xbox 360 for her grandson. That was all. She did not act like she was suffering from something. She just did not bathe. Story 6. I am in the Navy. On one deployment, a fellow sailor bragged and laughed about paying for an escort and then deliberately unloading diarrhea on her face during sex. I stopped talking to him, and several tours later I have not forgotten how disgusting he was. Story 7. An old coworker never showered and picked her nose so often that she smeared nasal mucus on her keyboard. It was so gross that she earned the nickname Booger Lady. She was eventually fired after developing multiple ringworm rashes that she did not treat out of laziness. She did not care that it was contagious. She thought it was funny and told everyone it was a perk of being a dog mommy. Story 8. The younger sister of my former sister-in-law lives in a basement with her dog, which she never takes outside. He urinates and defecates on the floor, and she leaves it there for days. She also leaves old food, drinks, plates, and dishes on the floor, even after they rot or grow mold. Her personal hygiene is very poor. She rarely showers, and her body odor from the buttocks, feet, and vagina is noticeable from a distance. A combination of sour feet, dried fecal matter, and a rotten fish-like smell. Indoors the smell is unbearable, and it spreads outdoors. She never cleans the bathroom or flushes. She leaves fecal residue, menstrual blood, and other soiling on the seat. Most disturbingly, she is married, and her husband has similarly poor hygiene. Story 9. When I worked in the office, there was a man who, every day for weeks, defecated on the floor and on the toilet seat in one of the stalls. He would also wipe himself with his bare hands and smear feces on the walls. He needed to be fired and to seek help. The coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic began soon after, and fortunately I never had to deal with him again. Story 10. I worked with a man at a previous job who was the quality manager. He was on his 7th marriage and struggled with porn addiction and painkillers. He would bring up anal sex in job interviews, then take pills, go to his office, and stare at the ceiling for hours. He once had a bowel accident. His 7th wedding was vape-themed. Everyone received vapes for the wedding photos. We fired him. He went to work at Yankee Candle in a corporate role and was fired from there as well. Last I heard, he sexually assaulted a woman and reportedly took medical leave for a bad elbow to obtain more painkillers. Story 11. An adolescent psychiatrist. He took a shine to his young female patients. He took his time, groomed them, did drugs with them, injected them with drugs, molested them, burned his offices down twice, and gaslight everyone in his orbit for years. When it finally caught up to him, he was considered too ill to stand trial. 30 years of abuse of vulnerable young girls and women whom no one believed, until a particular police officer did. I saw a post his 60-year-old daughter made recently, still adoring, bordering on religious reverence. Edit, he is dead. We talked about it, but we did not feel one bit better. Sometimes dead is not dead enough. It was the police officer who told us, 5 years after the initial trial began. This stand-up human being called each and every one of the women involved. If he was able, he came in person to talk. He cried with me when we talked. He was better than any therapist. Thank you, officer. You were one of the good ones. Rest in peace. Story 12. My great-grandmother would trip her own daughter, who had to use a walker because she had polio. I remember her laughing loudly as my aunt flailed on the ground. Story 13. I never met them, but I spent 2 full days cleaning a small apartment they had been evicted from. The cleanest room had dozens of soft drink bottles, plastic bags, cigarettes, pill bottles, and vitamin supplements scattered across the floor. 2 rooms were 3 feet deep in trash. I found sex toys and drug paraphernalia and extensive black mold along the walls. There was a month's worth of half-empty dishes in the sink, many with rot and mold. They had lived there less than a year. Update. I also remembered an older man who used to show up at my church on Sundays. He would stop young women and tell them they needed to get pregnant to be saved and receive crowns in heaven. He also filmed people randomly, sometimes following them around the room. He had a friend who once approached me when I was 8 years old and, while I did not know him, told me it was time for bed. Years later, I learned that the first man was a former service member who had been dishonorably discharged for grooming and sexually assaulting a 12-year-old girl. Story 14. I worked with a woman at a previous job. She lived next to a lake in a cabin. Her water well had failed, so afterward she would either defecate in a bucket in her backyard or in the lake. She proudly told us this one day in the office. Another time she said her cat gave birth next to her in bed one night. She said she simply rolled over and went back to sleep after the delivery. Story 15. In 2011, at Nashville Airport, I was a massage therapist working at a chair massage business in the Delta terminal. These were clothed massages with clients seated in a chair. The man had a putrid odor, dried, crusty blood around his ears, greasy hair with dandruff, crusty feet, and long toenails peeking out of a pair of slide sandals. His smell was so bad that when I got home I searched online for Ron Jeremy stinks and found that some adult film actresses had clauses refusing to work with him for that reason. He was also a bad tipper and apparently known for that at the airport massage bar. I still get sick to my stomach thinking about the encounter. Story 16. I worked for a small municipality. A man was eagerly waiting for his mother to die so he could inherit her very decrepit house. He talked as if owning property in town would make him a man and allow him to sit closer to the front at church. He made me uncomfortable. Story 17. My boyfriend and I tried to help a friend move after her home was condemned, and she had to put her belongings into storage. We found out the hard way that she and her mother were hoarders. They had 4 cats and rarely cleaned the litter or treated the cats for fleas. Story 18. I resent my brother for several reasons. Mainly because he sexually assaulted me when I was young and was never held accountable. He also took advantage of our parents after my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. He and his children moved in with them, made the house unlivable, and never paid any rent. When my mother's condition worsened and my father had to run to the store, he trusted her to my brother's care, and my brother would lock her in the bathroom. I did not learn that until after my husband and I moved my parents in with us to help care for them. The most deplorable thing was that he did not come to the funeral because we refused to ship her body back to their home state. My father wanted her here where he lives now so he can visit her more easily than by making a 7-hour trip. Story 19. My cousin was 16 and he was 30 when they began dating. He groomed her, and they married at her religious parents' insistence. At her brother's wedding he wore dirty clothes with holes and smelled like a basement. He never cleaned or cared for his wife or their son. Story 20. This is about my uncle's ex from more than 20 years ago. Going into her house was like walking through an overstuffed trash bag, with only a narrow path to walk through. Her sink was filled with rotting dishes, and on top of them were piles of paper plates because the dishes were all dirty. It makes me laugh looking back at how crazy it was. Her bathroom had only one of the 4 interior walls, with exposed pipes and wires. The house burned down a few years after she and my uncle separated. She got a very nice Habitat for Humanity house, which she filled with trash less than a year later. Story 21. My father-in-law rarely bathed, never washed his hands or brushed his teeth, wore the same clothes for weeks at a time, and regularly urinated on my bathroom floor. I finally went no contact and he thankfully died last year. Nobody came to his funeral. Story 22. My uncle was a high-powered lawyer married to a judge. They were estranged from my grandmother and my mother for years until my grandmother was hospitalized and unable to speak. He swooped in and somehow obtained power of attorney, removed my mother and our entire family from the will, and sold everything my grandmother owned, leaving my mother with nothing to remember her by. My grandmother had intended to leave everything to my mother except her car, which she had repeatedly told me she planned to give me as my first car. That never happened. We did not see a cent from any of the sales and did not receive anything to remember her by. My mother was my grandmother's best friend and caretaker and was not even allowed at the funeral. He did not need the money. It was all out of spite. Story 23. For part of middle school, I attended a small private school that thankfully no longer exists. The head of the school during my 7th grade year was a man I will call Dr. S, and I sensed bad vibes from him. He came across as arrogant, more like a sleazy salesman than an educator, because he was more the former than the latter. At the end of the year, he suddenly left his role under very suspicious circumstances and returned to the troubled teen industry. The troubled teen industry is built on tricking parents of children with behavior issues into sending them to expensive therapeutic schools to fix those problems. In reality, those schools are often poorly regulated, staffed by inexperienced people, and run programs that resemble institutionalized child abuse rather than education. Dr. S started 2 of these schools, one in Virginia and another in South Carolina. The Virginia school is now closed, but the South Carolina school still operates. It has been sued multiple times for failing to protect students from sexual abuse by staff or other students. From what I heard, this does not surprise me. One rumor about why he left my middle school was that he slept with an underage exchange student who lived with him. I have also seen reports that he had boys in his program sleep in his basement. Even if he never personally abused children, which I doubt, he allowed abuse to occur and profited from it. He is the most disgusting person I have ever met. 13-year-old me was right about him. For more information, read a webcomic about the notorious Elon School, which is now closed but was arguably the worst of these programs. Story 24. This may not be the most disgusting thing I have ever experienced, but it is the most recent. My husband's manager is gross, and because it is a small business, it is hard to avoid him. Ron constantly and loudly belches and passes gas. He does not care if customers are nearby and seems almost proud of it. He is in his 60s. If an attractive woman or young woman comes into the store, he stops what he is doing and stares with his mouth open, following her around the place with his stomach hanging below his shirt. When he uses the toilet, he urinates on the seat and floor, so my husband sends him back in to clean up after himself. He frequently corners customers he thinks will be sympathetic and complains about his divorce. He is lazy and ineffective. No one understands how he has kept his job, as even the owner seems to dislike him. Story 25. My uncle was a pedophile and a scammer, an abusive partner to my auntie. He was one of those monsters who was all charm and knew how to get people to like him when you first met him. Then the darkness started to show and he would control, use, and abuse people. Overall, he was terrible. Cancer got him in the end, but by then most people would not have cared or shed a tear. The saddest thing was that he left so many people blaming themselves for what he did to them. My grandparents never forgave themselves for not seeing the signs when he was first introduced, and one of my cousins who was abused by him was so under his control that her relationship with her husband nearly broke down because she could not understand why he would not let this man have any relationship with their kids. Story 26. My father. When I was as young as 6, I planned to die because I thought he would not kill my mother if I killed myself. That sounded serious, but I am 23 now and over it. Story 27. My ex would get drunk and try to physically attack me. When I restrained her, she would spit on me and do other things. The last few years of our decade-long relationship were rough. Story 28. There was a man who used to work at a smoke shop near me. We had mutual friends and he would show up at parties. He was a giant dirtbag and a real piece of shit. Some of the things he did were insane. He had a friend take a series of photos of him sticking a lollipop up his ass, wrapping it back up, and then giving it to a homeless man. I am convinced he got away with it because he could be charming. When he spoke to you, he paid attention, but his delight in cruelty was unbelievable. I could not understand why he had any friends. Story 29. It was probably my older sister who sexually assaulted my younger sister and me. She was 15. We were 6 and 5. She is now unemployed, extremely obese, does not shower often, and is a hoarder, the garbage kind rather than the collector kind. I have not spoken to her in nearly a decade, but I occasionally hear news about her from my mother, typically that she fell on the stairs or that she got another cat. My younger sister did not turn out much better, and I wonder if the sexual assault had anything to do with that. Story 30. I am a social worker. Sometimes I do home visits, and it's kind of hard to tell which is worst. I used to visit a client whose apartment smelled so bad that I had to cut small chunks of deodorant, put them in my nostrils, and rub Vicks VapoRub under my nose to avoid vomiting. Keep in mind I served in the United States Air Force for 8 years, where I spent most of my time on the flight line smelling jet fuel, so my sense of smell was already impaired long before I met this client. Story 31. My brother-in-law and his wife invited us to their place for the first time. When they turned on the front room light, the carpet looked like it was moving. Cockroaches scurried out of the light. They chain-smoked in the trailer and were hoarders who never cleaned. Empty Mountain Dew cans were everywhere. Story 32. My aunt's former husband cheated on her and abused her. She left him for the milkman. Story 33. I worked with a disgusting, overweight man whose diet consisted of SpaghettiOs, Hot Pockets, and energy drinks. He had the worst bowel movements I have ever smelled. It was a literal biohazard for 30 feet around the bathroom for over an hour each time. He wore his underwear inside out to make them last longer. They had skid marks and you could smell it when he walked by. Story 34. I had a college roommate for 3 days. He had previously lived with a friend who grew tired of him after 4 days. I decided to be nice and take him from my friend. Worst mistake ever. He was a chronic masturbator, a nudist, and addicted to pornography. He did not clean up and did not respect others or his own privacy. I do not think he showered during the 3 days he was in my room. Semen was everywhere. I think he only stopped to sleep and eat. Story 35. A man in my building always smiled and was nice. My parents always said hello, and my outgoing father was friendly with him. He was an elderly European man, and I believe his wife died at some point. One day I was taking the elevator to my apartment and he was inside. He lived on a higher floor. I said hello to him because my parents did. When the elevator reached his floor and he was getting off, he told me that I could come to his house anytime I wanted. He hugged me and tried to kiss me on the mouth. I did not have the confidence to scream and tell him no. I froze and tried to turn my face to keep him from touching my mouth. I still remember his hands on me. I did not tell my parents until I was an adult because I was afraid they would call me a liar. I was sure they would not believe me, so I made sure to never take the elevator with him alone again. Story 36. My ex. Every morning, while I was getting our son ready for daycare, he would masturbate on the toilet to pornography on his phone while simultaneously having his morning bowel movement. After I broke up with him and told my brother about his level of depravity, we coined the term schwank. Story 37. My first college roommate Allison was allergic to bathing and addicted to sex. She told me she had 15 abortions because she refused to use condoms. Our dorm smelled like an abandoned Chuck E. Cheese, and she would spray Victoria's Secret Love Spell body spray to cover it up. To this day, that scent makes me instantly nauseous if I smell it on someone. She was also a sociopath who openly admitted that she had pushed her stepmother down a flight of stairs and threatened to do the same to me. Story 38. My father and I always had an odd relationship. He was a little inappropriate. When I was 15, he kissed me while drinking, saying, "You always look like you want to kiss me." I ran and locked myself in my room. I kept that secret for weeks until my mother pried it from me. He was confronted that night. He broke into full-body sobs, saying he had no memory of it and that he would never drink again. Guess what? He drank like it was water until the day he died, May 12th of last year, my mother's birthday. I had been very angry with him in the last years of his life, not because of what he did to me but because of how he treated my mother. He treated her as if she were beneath him. If you have heard the song Labor by Paris Paloma, that's how he was. Back to the heart of the problem. He was inappropriate with me. After he died, I began thinking about my childhood. I decided to call my eldest sister and asked if our father had been inappropriate toward her or our other two sisters. She said yes, he used to play bathroom games with her. I hate that man so much. I kind of wish he were still alive so I could punch him in the defibrillator. Sorry for the long story. I had kept it inside. Story 39. I knew a man who had a difficult time keeping himself clean. He had no physical limitations, he simply did not. He openly said that he once went to Las Vegas and paid for an escort, but she refused to be intimate because he smelled. I am not sure whether he was proud of that or whether he told the story to get others to side with him by blaming her. Many people called him stinky behind his back, but he seemed like a pleasant person if you looked past the odor. None of our co-workers wanted to sit in his work van because the smell embedded itself in the seat fabric. When he did not work one day, they would claim something was broken on the van so they would not have to deal with the odor. Story 40. Physically? When I was in basic training, we had a guy who refused to shower. He left his locker unlocked, and people went through the barracks during the day to see if they could catch someone doing that so they could throw their stuff all over the place. Our lieutenant came through, found this guy's locker, and opened it to handle the issue, but it smelled so bad that instead of touching his things, the lieutenant took the locked lockers to the left and right and dropped them on the occupants' faces. At the end of training that day, we were punished so severely they made us exercise until half of us were vomiting. They told us we would do that daily until this guy fixed the problem. Story 41. I was in the same room as Rupert Murdoch. His halitosis made the whole room smell as if he had defecated in it. He is figuratively a rotten human. Story 42. Not sure. I met someone a few times who was eventually sentenced to the longest consecutive prison sentence in our state's history for being a prolific serial rapist. Or there was my best friend's boyfriend in high school, who was essentially a cult leader and later attempted to murder his parents. One parent survived, probably the boyfriend. Of the two, he scared me the most. Story 43. My great-great-grandfather. In 1914, they were living in the United States. My great-great-grandmother became homesick, so he sent her back to Italy for a year. She was pregnant with my great-grandmother. He did not send money to bring his wife and daughter back to the United States for 10 years, even though he could have afforded it. There is a high chance he started a second family in the United States during that time. Story 44. I know the woman in this video. She has always been trash. In the video she says that an undocumented immigrant killed her child. The truth is she was in a cheap motel doing drugs and was having sex with a man, and the child, about 2 or 3 years old, wandered down to the pool and drowned. I have a long list of the things she has done over the years. Hostile encounter with Make America Great Again death cult members at a Beto rally predictably ends in violence. Reddit bad choices good stories. Story 45. A murderer. My mom's best friend was dating a man who came to our house because we had a pool party and invited her and her boyfriend. Sometime after she broke up with him, he showed up at her house and waited for her to come home. When she got out of her car, he chased her and shot her in the back of the head as she banged on the neighbor's door for help. He couldn't handle being dumped, so he murdered her. Story 46. I knew a guy in the marching band who had threesomes with another bandmate. The bandmate would not wash his hands and would eat kimchi before fingering him, and it burned when he inserted his fingers into his anus. Story 47. My sister's friend was a true gutter punk. He smelled so bad you could still tell he had been there hours after he left, even from outside. He got into a huge fight with my sister because she washed his clothes when he was out one night. He said she washed the high out of them. He made G. Alan look like a nun. Gutter punks are pretty gross. Story 48. A friend of mine was at the International House of Pancakes with her childhood friend and his father. She texted me asking if I wanted to stop in and hang out for the night since they would be going back to their house afterward. I was in the city, so I met them there. Her friend was off-putting on his own. Everyone who had met him said he gave off unsettling vibes, but she did not seem bothered because she had known him so long. His father was a textbook creepy, unkempt man. He looked like a cross between Jabba the Hutt and the Crypt Keeper. A too small, stained undershirt completed his look that night. My friend and I were chatting when he added, unprompted and off-topic, "If you are a woman and you let a man pay for your meal and then have sex with him, you are a sex worker, you are a prostitute." We paused briefly and then awkwardly resumed our conversation. It was very strange, and I understood why many found her childhood friend odd. There were many cutting things I would have liked to say in response to his inappropriate remark, but he was not worth it and seemed unwell. Story 49. A man I worked with about 20 years ago smelled strongly of body odor. He used a photo of a Thai woman in a barely there bikini as the background on his work computer. He constantly talked about being a sex tourist in Thailand. One story involved a taxi driver in Bangkok who said his niece would love to meet him. I told him the girl was probably trafficked and that I doubted she was actually his niece. After that, he never talked to me about his trips again. I later overheard him telling other people how bad Canadian women are. Story 50. I've posted about this before. I met a serial killer once. We briefly exchanged words. Things felt off and we moved on. A few years later, I saw his picture in the paper, and it was him. Story 51. My dad had a college friend they called the Beast. He lived in the dorms and almost never showered, brushed his teeth, or did laundry. Once every few months, before his parents visited, a group of 4 roommates would forcibly clean and dress him because his parents had threatened to withdraw him from school. They would hose him down and scrub him in the communal shower while he screamed in distress. I wonder what kind of mental illness the man was struggling with. Story 52. I will not dox him, but he did the following. 1. He cheated on his girlfriend for a year while she paid for everything. 2. He let his new girlfriend convince him to record the breakup and to be deliberately cruel. 3. He chose to live directly above his terrified ex-girlfriend where she could hear everything he did. He could have moved because we offered him $10,000 to go somewhere else, but he did not take it. 4. His ex-girlfriend was especially afraid because his sexual kink was consensual non-consent and she was a survivor of past sexual abuse. She held a knife while trying to leave her apartment. 5. Now he and his friends are making my husband and my life miserable for amusement. This all happened after we had extensively supported him. Story 53. I had a principal who faked breast cancer to cover up an affair. She cheated on her husband by pretending to go to doctor appointments. Eventually, the Board of Education found her suspicious and had her resign. The woman is still working in education in a nearby state. Story 54. This man in my direct messages keeps fetishizing people of my race while simultaneously saying he wants them dead. Story 55. Hands down, Andy Dick. I was going to my favorite bar to meet some friends. They texted me that he was there, and I thought they were being facetious about a similar-looking patron. Lo and behold, who should be sitting beside their table but the infamous Andy Dick. At the time, I did not really know about his sexual assaults and general gross behavior. I only knew he was a washed-up music television-era celebrity. He was extremely drunk. He kept groping and pinching me. I am a man, and he harassed every man and woman who walked past him. He was insufferable. The friend with him, a realtor, told us they had been kicked out of another bar because a woman claimed that Andy spiked her drink, and he laughed as if it were a silly mistake like forgetting your wallet at home. Thankfully, they both left, but I felt really grossed out by the whole ordeal. Story 56. The Shah of Iran was a nice person one-on-one, but there is a reason he died in exile. Even though I was only 11, he treated me well, which may have been because we both shot a 24 on our first round of skeet, so I was his equal. He turned out to be the most evil person I have ever known. Story 57. A local politician who favors banning books in schools and who has no experience or degree of any kind is the Minister of Health. They are very religious and have many children. They are pushing for privatization of various parts of our government-funded healthcare to line their pockets. I work in healthcare. Ironically, they were the education minister at the time. Everyone is treated the same regardless of personal character. They pushed a curriculum that taught grade 2 or 3 students that non-Christians are others, despite the long history of other religions and groups in the area. It also glossed over some atrocities. This applied to both public and Catholic government-funded schools. Story 58. My mom had always warned me not to go up the hill, a road behind a friend's house that led into some hills. I found out why. My friend asked me to drive her up there to give something to her sister's boyfriend's stepdad's side piece. I was young, freshly licensed, and it was only a couple of miles, so I agreed. After we turned off the paved road, she directed me to what could barely be called a house. It was mainly a heap of siding and trash, with bits of furniture and car parts scattered about. It looked like a set from a television show or a movie. I did not see any electrical lines to the place, although there were lines running a few feet away. I asked if she was just squatting there and was told no, this was the family homestead. She just did not keep it up. My friend refused to get out of the car and kept telling me to honk. She said we were not allowed in any way. Eventually, a person came staggering out. It was 11 a.m. I could smell her from the car with all the windows up. Alcohol, body odor, and the unmistakable smell of death. She came up to the car, and I started gagging. It was that bad. I could not even understand the words coming out of her mouth. Then I realized she had a gun. She started waving it around drunkenly, yelling at us, until my friend screamed that we were there to drop off an item from her niece. I don't even remember what it was. The woman came closer, acting nice, then suddenly started shouting again. My friend yelled to start driving, and the woman threw the item out of the window. She staggered after us, shouting and waving the gun. When I mentioned the lack of electricity, my friend said the woman also did not have running water. This was not a typical rural area. Apparently the whole area on that hill was like this, maybe 5 families. You do not go there because they do not like outsiders. Story 59. I was pregnant and at a park with my family, watching my nephew. A Washington, D.C. lobbyist was there with his child and started talking to me. When I asked what he did, he rambled about going to law school but not wanting to be a lawyer because he said he would burn in hell. He was not joking. Then he said he became a lobbyist instead. When I asked what he lobbied for, he replied, "Whatever they pay me for." Story 60. Corrupt politicians in my country have made theft their livelihood. They have zero shame and are not even hiding it. They are like terrorists or drug cartels with their little armies. Story 61. A man who, while picking fruit at work, had sex with a cantaloupe and drank the juice afterward. Story 62. I love him, but I wish I could go back in time and stop him from meeting my sister. My brother-in-law, later my ex-brother-in-law, cheated on my sister with more than 10 women, every time she was pregnant. It did not come to light until after the children were born. They separated briefly while he went to therapy. I am 10 years younger. Maybe I could have done more if I had been older. A year or two after they reunited, my wife, my sister, him, and I went to a casino. He launched into a drunken rant, calling my sister the worst things you could say to a wife. My own drinking problem made things worse, and my Marine Corps developed mentality kicked in, and I tried to change things. She calmed us both down, but it ruined the relationship for a long time. I begged my sister to leave him and told my father that he had to go, but everyone dismissed it as drunken arguing. That night, Rachel accidentally told me that he had pushed her down during an argument about the house being a mess from a dog. She was very depressed, but nobody listened. After this, he apologized, and she wanted us to be friends and brothers again, but I couldn't. She had been having health problems for a long time and no doctors would listen, even though she was a registered nurse and the charge nurse for labor and delivery for 12 years. Every blood test showed a white blood cell count above 18,000 for months. Eventually, she got worse, and a family friend who was a doctor told my dad she needed psychiatric help. I had just gotten married and was in the honeymoon phase. My wife and I were spending all our time alone, and I became annoyed that my sister would come over uninvited, sleep on our couch, and not leave us alone. I knew she did not feel well, but I thought she had stopped taking care of herself and was depressed. She also had bipolar disorder. I started pushing her out of my life. When my wife became pregnant, I did not tell my sister first. That devastated her. I should have told her first and forgiven my brother-in-law. That Christmas we were all at my parents' house. She was very sick with a fever of 104 degrees Fahrenheit, could not have a bowel movement, and was essentially treating herself. She waited as long as possible to go to the emergency room because she loved getting the family together and making the kids happy. My brother-in-law told her that day she was a hypochondriac and to stop wasting the family's money on emergency room visits. 3 months later, I had settled into a distant relationship with her. The only time in my life I did not talk to her every day. She got very sick. I did not call or text. She went to the local hospital, and the next day she was flown by air ambulance to an intensive care unit. I was taking finals that day, and by the time I reached the hospital, she had passed. If you read this, I appreciate it. I have never written it out before. I do not care what people say about women in abusive relationships. Do not let them figure it out on their own. If you are a brother, do not be weak and fail like I did. Man up and do whatever is necessary. Story 63. I used to be a cable technician, and there was a house I visited a few times a month. The house belonged to an old man who I'm pretty sure was not aware of what was going on around him. The son would order a cable box for his room and have the bill go to his father's account. The daughter would get mad at him and call me back a few days later to remove it. This went on for years. That house was awful. Puppy pads were stacked everywhere. The dog had left feces and urine all over. Food, trash, and bugs covered the floor. The smell was horrific, and our cable boxes were always covered in something when I picked them up. I bought a giant Germex bottle just for that house. Story 64. My roommate, who I thought was my boyfriend for over 35 years, is now a former roommate. He never worked a real job. He played on people's sympathy, fathered children, and moved back to California, leaving the mother so he would receive more money from supplemental security income. He did not shower during the 8 years I lived with him. He is the kind of person you would literally give the shirt off your back to, and when the moment suits him, he stabs you in the back. I have known him through a lot, and all the friends he has made eventually see his true colors. He has been in a holding pattern because he thinks he will inherit his father's money. Follow your gut with people. It's like those women who marry serial killers. In the last year, I have had a wake-up call about many people I befriended. A handful of wonderful people and a truckload of jerks. Hindsight. Story 65. In person, it was Donald Trump. I met him on the slopes at the Telluride ski basin around 1990. At the top of the mountain, he was drawing attention to himself. There were 6 or 8 of us. He came off as a slick, dishonest used car salesman. There was absolutely no reason to lie, yet he did. Story 66. My ex-dark post. After I had my son, I had zero interest in sex. I think I had postnatal depression and my body disgusted me. Psychologically, I did not want him touching me because I was struggling. He became very frustrated. One day, while he was at work, he began sexting me, which made me uncomfortable. When he finished his shift, he came home. My little boy was asleep for the night. There was no hello, he just walked in. I went to give him a cuddle as usual, but instead he dropped his pants, pushed me down, and forced me to give him oral sex. Tears streamed down my face as I thought about how to make it end faster. He grabbed my head and pushed, and after what felt like an eternity, it was over. I felt like I was going to vomit. He went for a shower, sat at his video game console, and nothing was ever said. I have never felt more disgusted with myself in my entire life. Story 67. My former best friend publicly and falsely accused his mother of raping him, which caused her to lose her teaching job. Story 68. There used to be a regular at a bar I worked at in college named Stevie the Gimp. He had scoliosis or something similar and a Quasimodo demeanor, but beyond that he was an utter asshole. He had a complete lack of personal hygiene. His breath could knock a buzzard off. A shitwagon, and he reeked of ancient body odor and filth. He was a close talker and a harasser of women. One of the worst people I ever had to cut off on a regular basis, and the only one I ever honestly considered correcting with the baseball bat we kept under the register. Story 69. When my daughter was in elementary school, I volunteered to chaperone field trips. Once her first grade class visited Chinatown in Los Angeles. Part of the experience was eating lunch in a Chinese restaurant. One of the fathers came as a chaperone and behaved extremely rudely. The food was served in large bowls that were passed around. He grabbed the bowls as soon as they were set down, piled his plate sky high, ate greedily, and reached for the bowls again before some of the children had even had a first serving. He ate as if he had not eaten in a month and did not even close his mouth while eating. It was gross, disgusting, and rude. Story 70. I worked with a guy on site who soiled his overalls, worked in them all week, then painted them white on Friday, hung them up in the van until Monday and called them clean. Story 71. My ex. 1. He used to fart all the time, everywhere, unashamed and loudly. He would literally lift his leg like a dog and rip one, often after sex and even under the covers. 2. He ate like a trash can, no chewing, all swallowing. Sometimes when he did chew, he would open his mouth wide and show the contents to me or his friends. Food would get stuck in his beard and he would let egg yolk drip without wiping it until he finished. 3. He told me confidently that he could get away with murder because he had thought about the plan beforehand. 4. He would grab my love handles whenever I put on a couple of pounds and say, "Oh, so squishy. More cushion for the pushin'." Big, old breasts. My body mass index has always been 17. He also commented on very petite or gaunt women, calling them so tiny. During phases when I was not eating much, he would say, "I could just break you in half." 5. He was half white, half Hispanic, and grew up mostly with the white side of his racist, evangelical Christian family. His father on the Hispanic side had been whitewashed and was discouraged from seeing his family. His sister used a racial slur for the Hispanic students she taught. He would roll his eyes, laugh, and say, "Oh, you can't say that," then talk about his Hispanic heritage around strangers. To connect with Hispanic artists. The reality was that he grew up in a religious, sexually abusive, racist, working-class family, which he called being poor. His mother was a special education teacher who continually made fun of her neighbor's daughter, who had an intellectual disability. He praises his family as loving and supportive, though I doubt anyone besides me knows how deranged they are. 6. Several therapists have confirmed that I experienced sexual abuse that could qualify as rape on dozens of occasions. I fell into deep depression and isolated alcoholism 2 years into the relationship, which he was aware of. This did not stop him from pushing for sex when I was half-conscious or intoxicated. It turned into him having sex with me while knowing I was intoxicated. Then the next morning shaming me for being intoxicated and ghosting me for days while telling me to do some self-care. 7. He listened to Joe Rogan podcast episodes for hours each day, integrated each episode into his persona, and talked down to his friends using what he heard. 8. All of his friends were younger than him. He surrounded himself with emotionally immature people and their siblings, made them feel important by having them do physical labor for his artistic work, and badmouthed them to me. 9. He gave a high-pitched giggle when I touched his penis and did not know how to put on a condom. 10. After years of supporting his dreams, mentally, physically, and financially, he ghosted me after the breakup. I did not even realize we had broken up. In the aftermath and years since, he has told people about my childhood trauma, my mother, and my personal struggles. He has tried to silence me by damaging my reputation. I have never shared any of this with anyone except my therapists over the years. And now here. 11. He never gave me a gift that he had not already owned. His final text message to me asked for a vinyl record and a broken ukulele back, each of which he had given me on my birthday and at Christmas, respectively. He pulled those gifts out at the last minute from his basement on both occasions. 12. The only dinner he ever took me to was at a restaurant where his friend's brother worked and where he had 2 free meal coupons. He insisted on ordering the filet mignon because it was the most expensive free course. 13. Every conversation was about himself, and he was so loud. When I visualize his mouth yapping, I want to slap him. All of this occurred as he approached his 30s. He is a narcissistic sociopath who still lives in the same large city and community as I do. I have never bumped into him. If I did, I think I would vomit in his face. Why was I with him? Because he exploited my emotional instability at the time, made promises, and was a very effective manipulator. Story 72. I am a former chief executive officer of a company you would never believe. I am a nurse and worked private duty, which is private pay, in Silicon Valley and the San Francisco Bay Area. It was hateful, wasteful, and deranged. Story 73. I worked with a man who wore a hemp necklace with a weird-looking, warped brown pendant in the center. When I asked him what it was, he said he had saved all his used condoms in a shoebox for a year, melted them together, and made a necklace from the result. He was a nice man otherwise. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.